Okay, moral arguments, which take particular or general facts about morality to support the existence of God. Generic argument from the objectivity of morality. Generally, if morality is objective, or morality can be objective only if God exists. Morality is objective, so God exists. We're all familiar with this sort of argument from Craig. So we can go to an abductive version of this argument, which is just
which
that
more people should be aware of.
Yeah. Morality is objective. If morality is objective, then God's the best explanation for it being objective. So God's the best explanation for it being objective, so probably God exists. And you could support that by saying, look, morality always seems to be tied to persons. If morality is objective, that means it must be tied to a person whose nature is objective some way. So there's different ways you could defend the main premise of that argument.
David Baggett's a good person to look at for that one.
Yes, definitely. Okay, we have arguments from evil for the existence of God. We have the first one, the normative implications of evil. Evil contrastively implies that there is a way the world ought to be. Some actually come close to defining evil this way as a deviation or distortion or corruption of the way things are supposed to be. But if that's true, then there's a way the world ought to be. But there can be a way the world ought to be only if there's an intention or goal or purpose behind it. So there is an intention or goal or purpose behind the world. If that's true, then that can be true only if God exists, so God exists.
I can see what you mean, how some of these arguments can fall into multiple categories, because I'm looking at some of the terms here and it looks like it could fall under the design category too.
Yes, and you'll see that even more with some of the arguments going forward. Evil as privation. Evil is a privation of goodness. It's like, well, the common analogy is it's like light and darkness. Evil's not primary. It doesn't have like some positive ontological status. Rather, it's a deviation or corruption or something to that effect of what is good. So evil is privation. If evil is a privation of goodness, goodness is ontologically and explanatorily prior to evil. If goodness is ontologically and explanatorily prior to evil, then there's more goodness in the world than evil, as being the main premise. If there's more goodness in the world than evil, probably God exists, so probably God exists. Now, the clever thing here is that 4 is just the converse of the problem of evil. So skeptics would argue that if there's more evil in the world than good, then probably God does not exist. Well, this just flips this around and says there's probably more goodness in the world than evil if evil is understood as privation. Okay, so from horrendous evils. Some evils are so bad that they seem to have a non-naturalistic dimension to them. I mean, some evils are just so objectively appalling and horrendous that they seem to have cosmic or spiritual significance. They seem satanic almost, or to require hell. They provoke existential outrage, shaking one's fist at heaven, that sort of thing. Okay, so if and reading up on this particular argument, some of the examples of horrendous evils I encountered were just so, I mean, I won't be able to get them out of my mind for a long time. So if one, then we're justified in thinking that they do have a non-naturalistic dimension to them. The best explanation of their being evil so horrendous that they have a non-naturalistic dimension is that good and evil have a deep spiritual significance. So probably good and evil do have a deep spiritual significance. But if that's true, then something like theism is probably true. So something like theism is probably true.
Wow, I didn't know that was... So is this... Did Plantinga defend that?
Well, it's in his 24 or so paper, and every argument in that paper is just defended ever so briefly. But yeah, that's one of his arguments.
Interesting. All right, let's move on. Man, I wish I would love to be able to spend more time on these, but we're like,
I know, because I've got a lot of notes that I'm skipping too. So from universal beliefs, certain moral beliefs are shared by all of humanity. If that's true, then God's the best explanation for that. So God's the best explanation for there being moral beliefs shared by all of humanity, so probably God exists. Okay, so the question there is, well, the main move here is just that, look, there can be moral disagreements between cultures and so forth, but actually these disagreements turn out to be fairly superficial. You know, the classic example is love your neighbor as yourself seems to be a pretty universally agreed upon moral principle. It just turns out that, you know, one tribe in Africa that sees it okay to murder members of another tribe, they just don't see members of the other tribe as persons. So they agree with the underlying principle. There's just unclarity on how it applies. So there's your argument from universal moral beliefs. Okay, Sidgwick and Kant. Sidgwick, a moral philosopher in the early 20th century, he thought that the central problem of ethics was showing how one could be true. Acting morally is always rational, only if it's always what's best, ultimately what's best for me. And he said it must be rational for me to act morally. Otherwise, noble deeds like self-sacrifice and altruism might be irrational. But it seems true that that's never irrational to be altruistic. So, 2, acting morally is always ultimately what's best for me, only if God exists. 2 is equivalent to, if God does not exist, then acting morally is not always what's ultimately best for me. That seems true. I mean, morality and self-interest come apart if God does not exist. So 3, acting morally is always rational only if God exists. Acting morally is always rational, so God exists. Okay, we have another Kantian argument. Yeah, from Robert Adams. The central term here is what it means to be, for a belief to be demoralizing. And he just says it means it's weakening or deterioration of moral motivation. So if a belief is demoralizing, it's morally undesirable. Let's see here. Do I need another term? Okay. If a belief is morally undesirable, there is a moral advantage in believing the opposite. It is demoralizing to believe that there is no moral order in the universe. And by moral order, he just means there is a balance of good over evil in the universe, where our moral acts make significant difference to that balance. So it's demoralizing to believe that there's no moral order in the universe, that nothing we do morally could make a difference. So it's morally undesirable to believe that there's no moral order in the universe. There's moral advantage in believing that there is a moral order in the universe. Theism provides the most adequate theory of a moral order of the universe. If theism provides the most adequate theory of a moral order of the universe, there's moral advantage in accepting theism. So there's moral advantage in accepting theism.
Sorry, I had the slide up late here, so
that's all right.
If you want to read the whole thing,
that one had a lot of premises. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And that one is in Robert Adams' Moral Arguments for a Theistic Belief. Pretty cool. Yeah. Okay, I think we're going a little bit quicker here, so we're on. We just hit another 10, so time for some more push-ups. I'm gonna do these quickly.
You want to change it up and do jumping jacks?
Nope.
Just kidding. Building those pecs.
Well, we're going slow enough to where it's not a big deal, I don't think.
You'll do push-ups. I'll take a drink of apple juice. That was a fast 10.
It was. That's what I'm saying. It's like there's a long amount of time. Sorry, let me get this back so you guys can hear me. There's a big amount of time between each set, so it's not too bad. It's enough rest. So
we have Oderberg's argument from Cosmic Justice, and by Cosmic Justice he means all virtue is rewarded and all vice is punished. Okay, so premise 1: we live in a rational moral order. And by rational moral order, we mean it's the case that where it always makes rational sense to behave morally. That's what it means that we live in a rational moral order. It makes sense always makes sense to behave morally. If we live in a rational moral order, yeah.
Liz Jackson just chimed in the live chat. She said, "Chad isn't doing push-ups. Lame."
Oh man, there was a time in high school when I was the king of push-up contests. Believe it or not, I was a wrestler in high school, and I prided myself on that. My wife would appreciate it if I did more push-ups.
All right, sorry to interrupt. Continue.
It's all right. So we live in a rational moral order. if we live in a rational moral order, there's cosmic justice. Again, that's understood as being all virtue is rewarded, all vice is punished. So there's cosmic justice. If there's cosmic justice, there must be a cosmic judge who administers it. So there's a cosmic judge who administers it.
Okay.
Layman's moral argument, and this moral argument actually has been quite influential and inspired a lot of similar arguments. One, in every actual case, one has most reason to do what is morally required. So one just says that there is overriding reason to perform one's moral duty. For example, let's say, forget the example. We'll just go on. If there is no God and no afterlife, then there are cases where morality requires that one make great sacrifice for only modest benefits. And he gives the example of like a poor widow who has the opportunity to steal like $10 million, and she knows that she would never get caught and no one else would be harmed by this. This is $10 million that no one ever even realized existed, but she would be stealing it if she took it. So if there's no God and no afterlife, then there are cases where morality requires that one make a great sacrifice for only modest benefits. So if there's no God, there's no reason why she shouldn't take that $10 million. If in a given case morality requires that one make a great sacrifice for only modest benefits, then one does not have most reason to do what is morally required. So if there is no God or afterlife, then in some cases one does not have the most reason to do what is morally required. But she does have reason to do what's morally required, namely not steal the $10 million. So it's false that there is no God or afterlife.
There you go. Layman's moral argument.
Okay, we have an interesting set of arguments that push more toward a Christian conception of God and not just a theistic conception. So we have Linda Zagzebski's argument from the need for divine aid in being moral. Now she asks, classic question that you encounter in ethics classes, why be moral? Well, she says, why try to be moral? And so by thinking about this question, she has the following argument. It is rational to try to be moral only if it's rational to believe the attempt would likely be successful. But it's not rational to believe the attempt would likely be successful if all we have is our own human faculties to go on. And this is because if all we have is our own faculties, we can't be confident that we have genuine moral knowledge, given the depth and diversity of moral disagreements. We can't be confident that we can overcome our moral weaknesses and bring about good in the world. And we can't be confident that our moral efforts wouldn't just be vain in the end. So, but three, it is rational to try to be moral. So it's rational to believe the attempt would likely be successful. So we have more than just our own human faculties to go on. Follows logically from 2 and 4. Now, if a theory postulates exactly what more we need to be rational in believing the attempt at being moral would likely be successful, then it's rational to believe that theory. Christian theism postulates exactly what more we need to be rational in believing the attempt at being moral would likely be successful. And namely, we have, by divine revelation, divine assurance and guidance, grace, providence, exactly we need the assurance of genuine moral knowledge, the assurance that we can overcome moral weakness, and that our moral efforts wouldn't be in vain. And so it's rational to believe Christian theism.
How do you say her name? Linda Zagzebski?
Yeah,
I'm so bad with names. Zagzebski, okay.
Brilliant philosopher. John Hare on the moral gap. Yeah. He's defended this argument over the course of like 3 decades. Now, what he means by the moral gap is it's a gap between the demand that morality places on us and our natural capacity to live up to it. So morality essentially demands that we be perfect, but it seems like we can't be perfect. So that's the problem. That's the moral gap that John Hare talks about. And it gives him this following argument. If one ought to do X, then one can do X. That's pretty much an indisputable principle of ethics. One ought to live up to the demands of morality. So it follows that one can live up to the demands of morality. But one can live up to the demands of morality only if one has the requisite extra-human assistance. So one does have the extra-human assistance. And similarly, we say that if a theory postulates exactly the extra-human assistance needed to live up to the demands of morality, it's rational to accept that theory. Christian theism does postulate exactly the extra-human assistance needed to live up to the demands of morality. And there he has in mind the Christian doctrines of atonement, justification, and sanctification. So it's rational to believe Christian theism.
John Hare. I'm gonna say it like that, Hare, because I don't, for no reason. But, all right.
All right. We have Kant on the duty to promote the highest good. Kant factors in a lot of moral arguments. Now, by highest good, Kant means perfect proportionment of happiness to virtue. So you're happy in like the eudaimonistic sense, like flourishing. You flourish to the extent that you're virtuous. Okay, that's what he means by the highest good. So we ought morally to promote the realization of the highest good. What we ought to do must be possible for us to do. It's possible for us to promote the realization of the highest good only if there's a God who makes that possible for us. And so because only God could ensure the perfect proportionment of happiness to virtue. So God exists. Okay, objective obligations and duty. Yeah. This should be a familiar argument. We have objective moral obligations. If we do, then they're best understood as divine commands. That was the subject of Robert Adams' unsurpassed book on theistic ethics. Goodness, it's escaping me. Finite and infinite goods. So objective moral obligations are best understood as divine commands. But if they are, then God exists, so God exists. And you'll see in arguments from obligations and duty, they often talk about how objective obligations and duty, the reason for thinking that there are such is that, well, let me just give you a quick example. We just had a bunch of snow the past few weeks here in Ohio. So at one point it was up to, 18 inches. And my wife has to get up very early for work to leave, sometimes at like 5:30 in the morning. And I could sleep in till the baby wakes up at like 9 o'clock. But she can't get out of the driveway if I don't get out and clear it. Sometimes there's maybe not, there could be just a little bit, just enough snow to where she could drive over. I could get away with like staying in bed. But there's just something pulling me. I mean, I really feel like a genuine, almost physical tension that pushes me out of bed to go shuffle that driveway. It's just the right thing to do. So moral obligations and duties often have this feeling of pushing and pulling people to behave in certain ways, which cries out for explanation.
Okay.
All right, Newman's
argument from
conscience. Guilt, shame, responsibility, and so on are only appropriately felt in relation to other moral agents. But sometimes we appropriately feel guilt, shame, responsibility for deeds done in secret that harm no one else. You see where this argument's going. So guilt, shame, and responsibility for deeds done in secret are appropriately felt only if there's another moral agent that's privy to deeds done in secret. So there is a moral agent that's privy to deeds done in secret. The best explanation of that is if there's a godlike being. So there is a godlike being.
This is super interesting. I've never heard of this argument, but I definitely want to think more about it. That's why I'm kind of pulling this up right now. I want to see what kind of additional resources there are.
Yeah, so if I remember correctly, I think Graham Oppie objects to this argument by saying, well, no, it doesn't. Guilt, shame, and responsibility don't imply relation to someone else because relation to yourself is sufficient. You can feel guilty yourself. And so, well, maybe so, maybe not. I mean, on the other hand, it's like there are some scumbags that probably don't feel, who would just get away with anything, and yet realize maybe you're a psychopath and realize that, yeah, you did do something wrong. So you know, a sophisticated defense of this argument might require a distinction between objective guilt, subjective guilt, things like that.
All right, let's move on. Argument. We're on number 59, so we're not yet at the halfway point. We'll see what we can do.
Okay. On the intrinsic harmfulness of wrongdoing, wrongdoing is intrinsically harmful to the wrongdoer, even if they don't feel like it. So harm here means not pain or suffering or a guilty conscience, but just having, or even having bad character. It just means objective well-being. You are not objectively as good off as you would be if you hadn't harmed someone or done something wrong to someone. Metaphorically, wrongdoing is like it's soul withering in a way, even if it doesn't seem to you to be. So wrongdoing is intrinsically harmful to the wrongdoer. That could be true only if the harm here is punishment from a godlike being. So there's a godlike being.
Resources on this one. Who's Clement Dore?
He's a philosopher, early 20th century philosopher. Most of his stuff was early mid 20th century, I believe. He's got a book on theism. Kind of a dated argument, but
this is why I love. Well, I've got a love-hate relationship with moral arguments, because I recognize that there's just so much research that I haven't done and that I haven't just put the effort into. Like, I don't know half of these people that you're referencing here, and these are all really interesting arguments. So this is just really cool. This is really cool. All right, moving on.
Moral knowledge.
Moral knowledge. Now this is an argument that this is one that I am very convinced of.
This shows up in the Blackwell Companion. The author there, what's his name? Linvell, Mark Linvell. We have moral knowledge. If naturalism is true, then we probably don't have moral knowledge. But if theism is true, we probably do. So if we have moral knowledge, that's strong evidence for theism and against naturalism. So moral knowledge is strong evidence for theism and against naturalism. And the main reason for thinking too is that the faculties we use to form moral beliefs wouldn't be aimed at truth, but fitness if naturalism is true. So it's possible that we could always have it's possible that we could have true moral beliefs if naturalism is true, but it's more likely that those true beliefs would be true by accident. It would be like believing it's noon when you look at the clock that says noon, and it is noon, but yesterday the batteries ran out of the clock and stopped the hands at noon. You know, you have a true belief that it's noon, but only by accident. So if naturalism is true, our moral beliefs are true only by accident. That's the main idea here.
And there's some more resources on that one. Okay, next one.
Okay, Ritchie defends the argument where we have a capacity to apprehend objective moral norms. But if that's true, the best explanation for that is that our cognitive faculties were intended to apprehend objective moral norms. So our cognitive faculties are intended to apprehend objective moral norms. But if 3 is true, theism is the best explanation for that. So theism is the best explanation for our having the capacity to apprehend objective moral norms. So he defends it pretty similarly. Yeah.
Yeah, let's just move on. Some of these we're just going to have to run through really quickly, and we can just rely on the screen being up and people looking.
Okay, from altruism.
We've hit another 10, so is it time?
We've got 2 more moral arguments. Do you want to do 12?
Yeah, let's wait.
Okay. So we have 2 arguments from altruism, where genuine altruism is sacrificial behavior for another. It incurs no benefit to yourself, your relations, or to your social group, okay? It's exclusively a sacrifice for someone else with no benefit. All right, if genuine altruism exists and is rational, that's a key premise. If naturalism is true, genuine altruism does not exist and is irrational. So, given that it does exist and is rational, naturalism is false. If theism is true, genuine altruism probably does exist and is rational. So, the existence and rationality of genuine altruism strongly confirms theism.
There's some.
We have a second argument. Yeah, we have a second argument from altruism from PRUSS, which is that moral altruism is irreducibly normative. This one will take a bit of explaining. Let's just
we're gonna have to leave it because we're getting.
I agree. There can be no naturalistic explanation for moral altruism if moral altruism is irreducibly normative. So there is no naturalistic explanation for moral altruism. There are good theistic explanations of moral altruism, however, which is evidence for theism.